It's also a great honor and privilege for me to be able to introduce to you David Orr. And although it's going to be a short introduction, because I want to hear what he has to say rather than what I have to say, this really is a remarkable man. He is the Paul Sears Distinguished Professor of Environmental Studies and Politics at Oberlin College. And he got his PhD from the University of Pennsylvania and has quite a track record in publishing books. The Global Predicament came out in 1979. His book Ecological Literacy came out in 1992. Earth and Mind in 1994. And these are not recycled books. These are each one original and interesting as they unfold. And is the last to be published, The Nature of Design, which came out last year. He's currently working on 2 books. One is a book on politics. Yeah, somebody has to do it. And a second book, which is the making of the Lewis Center. He has an extremely impressive career with lots of accolades and awards. I remember him most for the fact that he created the Meadow Creek Project, which was a rural think, do, teach, create center in Fox, Arkansas that brought people from all over the world to come together to think about the shaping of an ecological age. And he is very unusual in that he is a professor who actually tries to combine, to match the rhetoric and the reality. The rhetoric of intelligent design with the reality of teaching and working in the Lewis Center, which is one of the greenest buildings in the, one of the greenest institutional buildings in the country. And so David has done it. And that puts him in, I think, very unique territory. Finally, I consider him, as do many people, one of the greatest of contemporary educators. And it's with great pleasure, David, to have you here, and we all welcome you. Thank you.
John, thanks for those kind remarks. I had written out more he didn't read. It's nice to be here, and yesterday in Cleveland, Ohio, it was 75 degrees. At noon, it was so nice I just left my office and all the emails went out and ran, and I thought if it's 75 in Cleveland, it's got to be at least 65 up here. Got here midway in the flight, the pilot said there's snow flurries and it's 30 degrees in Burlington last night, and this is the warmest thing I have. I'd take it off. I'm still shivering. It's nice to be here, and this is an amazing course. You're listening to some incredible people, not the least of which is Bob Costanza and John Todd, but what a lineup of people. And I'd like to take the 40 minutes or so that I've got to talk obliquely to these issues. Most of what you're hearing has been around a while. Not all of it, to be sure, but most of it, a lot of it has been discussed and talked about for a long while. And there's a question I'd like to raise, and that is, how do we cross the chasm from, on one side of the canyon, from ideas, good ideas, ideas that we know that work, over to a different kind of reality, changing the default setting of society so the good ideas move across that chasm. Why do good ideas fail? And I want to go back and I want to say one other thing by way of preface, and that is this. For a long time, we've been right. The environmental movement and the progressive movement has been right about a whole lot of things. Our track record is extremely good. Our record at implementing things is not nearly as good. And I want to ask why. And then what do we do about that? I'm not concerned so much to analyze this intellectually at this point as to say, what do we do about it? How do we respond? How do you respond? How does this institution respond to the ideas being developed here throughout this course and around this area? One other thing by way of preface is this. This is an amazing place. Vermont, there's more happening in Vermont. This morning, John and I went down to the Intervale, and incredible number of experiments, bright, talented people doing amazing things. Vermont, in many ways, is leading the nation, in some ways leading the world, in rethinking how we make the human presence on the planet. So it's a particular pleasure to be here. Now, one final thing by way of preface. I don't know what your politics are. I can suspect, but I don't know. I think this time stinks. I think we're in deep trouble. And the militarization of U.S. foreign policy, not the least of it, and that's part of the difficulty now, that bad ideas are in control. And what do we do about that? How do we respond to that? Where do we find leverage? It seems like a very slippery slope, and it's hard to get the handle, control this, and let alone turn things around. So that's what I want to talk about. Let me give a list of ideas that I think we have that have worked well. By the way, can all of you in the back hear me okay? Do you want to hear me? They're reading papers. Bob, they normally read papers in the back row up here? No, I'm kidding. E.F. Schumacher, in 1973 in Britain, published a little book called Small is Beautiful. Very eloquent statement. It was about technology and scale. It wasn't an argument for smallness. It was an argument for appropriate calibration of our tools with our intentions, what we wanted to do in the world. The book had a good shelf life. You can still buy it, still in print, new edition of it out, but it's largely now disparaged. At about that same time, Donella Meadows, Dennis Meadows, the Oregon Randers, and Bill Behrens published a book called The Limits to Growth, a book that charted out 5 different dimensions of growth: population, technology, pollution, and so forth, and tracked those into the future and said if these continue at their present trends, collapse is virtually certain within, say, a century. That was widely disparaged. And the reaction to it was very strange because they looked at the world as a unified system. They didn't break it up into regional models. Another book that came out of Case Western in that same series the next year, 1974, broke the world up into regions, came to even more pessimistic conclusions. It was hailed as realistic. Limits to growth is still disparaged by many of the people, economists and so forth, as a unnecessary and unfortunate Jeremiad. In fact, if you go back and read it and read their caveats, it was a good piece of work. And given what they assumed about the world and given assumptions that tenfold increase in productivity and so forth, fairly generous on all accounts, that book was a reasonable book, largely disparaged. That was 1973 also. Herman Daly, who you heard last week, began to publish in about the steady state economy in 1973. The first reader on that came out in 73. The first book called The Steady State Economy came out in 1977. Yet we still have the same kind of economy. The ideas haven't gone very far. Like Schumacher, like limits to growth, those ideas have hit some kind of wall, some kind of resistance. Wendell Berry, classic book, 1977, The Unsettling of America. Angry, eloquent, and right. And Berry nailed what we now would look at as the entire food system. The agricultural system has been a huge disaster. Lots of information has flowed since then. Wendell has a piece coming out this fall, which in another book, which is a retrospective on the past 26 years since that book the first book came out, why things haven't changed. We're still losing topsoil, we're losing farmers, we're still becoming fatter people, we're the most obese people on the planet. Amory Lovins, the classic article in Foreign Affairs came out in 1976. The book Soft Energy Paths came out in 1977, and yet we're fighting what is effectively an oil war in Iraq at this point. That book and research and all the work since hasn't moved things very far, maybe a bit, but not very far. The work of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the first 3 volumes came out in 1990. The second set in 1995, the third set in 2000 or 2001. The science of climatic change is now very well developed, and yet we still do not have a de jure climate policy. We have nothing about climate other than simply a pedal to the metal fossil fuel kind of economy. Another piece of work came out in 1978. Most of you probably would not have read this, but Robert Sinsheimer, a biologist, at that time president of California Santa Cruz, I believe it was, wrote an article in Daedalus, Journal of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, called The Presumptions of Science. And he began the article by asking, is there or should there be forbidden knowledge? And his answer was yes, there is. There are some things that we can know that we're not ready to know. There are some things that if we know them, we couldn't control the results of it. And rather than the priority given to knowledge acquisition, the priority ought to be given to safety and sustainability of the society and so forth. There are other things that override the right of scholars to research things and so forth. An eloquent article, very powerful, and it raises all kinds of issues. If you place limits on knowledge, how do you do that? Who does that? That could very easily lead to book burning, and so there are all kind of complicated issues raised by that. But that article came out in 1977. It was like the classic case of somebody dropping a stone into a well and never hearing a splash. In April of 2000, Bill Joy from Sun Microsystems wrote an article, Why the Future Doesn't Need Us, picking up some of the same themes. And Joy's piece has also been widely discussed, but in contrast to Sinsheimer's, but also, like Sinsheimer's, ignored. Why do ideas take so long? Somebody better answer that phone. Now, why is this? On one hand, you could say we're slow learners. You're being exposed to incredible ideas. But ideas now, with whatever their shelf life, ideas that will have virtually no impact in the world. And maybe you'd say we are slow learners. One possibility is exactly that. Gandhi's work in nonviolence was done, the writing part was done pretty much in the late 20s, 1930s, 1940s, up to the point of his death. Gene Sharp's work in nonviolence, and yet we are still a very violent society. And the world is a very violent place. Maybe we're just slow learners. Maybe it's stupidity. Kenneth Boulding, an economist, perhaps the first steady-state economist from his work back in 1966 or 67, a wonderful thinker. Kenneth Boulding, who stammered when he said things, it just built audience tension. He would start to stammer and words would come out and you'd, come on, Ken, get it out. Finally would get it out, but he said, it took him about 5 minutes to say something that amounted to, don't ever underestimate the power of stupidity. Maybe we're just stupid. Or maybe it is that we're just a clever ape. Maybe it's our hard wiring. Maybe we've not reached the teachable moment, whatever that is. And whatever that is, and you hear people say, well, we need a catastrophe, just something big enough to get our attention, but small enough that we could survive from. And that's exactly what was it Richard Pearl said relative to just before 9/11, said what America needs is another Pearl Harbor. But we don't necessarily learn from catastrophe, or we don't necessarily learn the right things in the right way from catastrophe. That can sometimes drive us in a very different direction. Maybe it's simply money and power. You're going to hear Norman Myers here, was it next week or the week after, whenever. Norman Myers' work on perverse subsidies. We spend a lot of money propping up things that ought to be allowed to fail. His estimates, if I remember correctly, were something like worldwide $1.45 trillion of perverse subsidies for logging and overfishing and so forth. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's simply the power of money in Congress or whatever. Maybe we're not so much rational creatures as we are creatures that can rationalize and to become very good at rationalizing. Now, I don't know what we do about all of that. I want to set all of that aside for just a moment, because the question I'd like to raise with you in the 30 minutes or so we have left is, what do we do about it? What happens here in a setting like this? And the first thing I'd like to observe is that we live at a point of vacuum. On the big issues, there is virtually no leadership where we expect leadership to occur. And I think there are reasons for that. I don't think that's a mistake. I think there are lots of reasons for it. But on issues of climate change and biodiversity or building cities or better transportation policy, there is virtually no effective voice in Washington for anything that looks much past the next election. Virtually none whatsoever. The power of lobbying in Washington is enormous. The power of television is enormous. And we are educated more by television than we are in settings like this. If you're average, you've seen probably 20,000 hours of television by the time you're maybe 18 or 19 years of age. What happens in settings like this is often remedial. So what do we do here? How do we move ideas in this vacuum? What can we do if corporations aren't going to do it or governments aren't going to do it? What can universities and colleges and so forth do? So that's where I want to start with that question for you. Now, this is going to be partly autobiographical. I want to explain some things that we do and how we do it and why we do it, but not as a model for you, but simply as a story that I know how to tell. The slide, is that slide still on the... I put that on here because John Todd and I were going south out of Miami one time, and we were driving out of the Miami airport, and John indicated a need for a beer. And I thought it sounded like a good idea. We drove further and further south. We got down to the point where the next bar, after the Last Chance Saloon, the next bar was down in the Keys. And we had to turn left and go over to the East Coast or go out to the coast, but this was the Last Chance Saloon. And that's just kind of symbolic. The story behind it is we got out of the car at the Last Chance Saloon, and you'll notice a skull and crossbones. It turned out to be a biker bar, and there were some very mean guys in that bar. And John and I decided that we'd pass up the last chance. And so we went on. That's kind of symbolic, too, of where we are, I think, also. Let me talk about education. 2 slides in education.
It's backwards.
I think they're all going to be backwards then. Whoever put my slides in, is it possible to turn them upside down real quick? But I can tell you about these 2. And it doesn't matter whether they're upside down, backwards, or inside out. That's when he kind of talks. Just turn the thoughts in your head upside down. This is about pedagogy. And I want you to compare that slide. That's kind of how the world works. That's the connections between things. But that's not how we organize knowledge. So compare this slide with the catalog for UVM or Oberlin or Harvard or whatever else, where we've taken knowledge and divided things up into mailbox pigeonholes, hermetically sealed. And it is possible to know things or believe you know things or become tenured in one of those hermetically sealed boxes, knowing things that people in other departments and programs or other parts of the university know not to be true. Are we gaining on it? It's still back. Well, it doesn't matter. The point is, these are 5 of the major variables and just obvious linkages, but you know all that stuff. You don't need to see that right side up or inside out or whatever. Now, as an illustration, this is a course in which you're doing a lot of reading in economics. And it is possible to be tenured in, and I have nothing against economists. Some of my best friends are economists. But you could be tenured in an economics department, and many have been for a long time, believing that the world works in some ways in a fashion that physicists know it doesn't work that way. But you can be tenured in that box. And you can take certain beliefs about what makes people tick. And what makes people tick, economists say, well, to maximize gains, minimize losses. People are self-maximizing creatures, and they'll always be that way. That's not only descriptive, it becomes prescriptive. We'll take that thought over to any department of philosophy or theology, or psychology for that matter. And that knowledge doesn't flow. That's not solvent in those other places. We know that people sometimes can be self-maximizing, but we know they can also be altruistic. And we know that you have to take prescription apart from description. Those are separate things. And it's so easy for description to fade into, well, this is how they behaved, and this is how it's rational for them to behave. Then you can take the view of economists, I just pick on economists for a moment, but you can take their view that economics is really more basic than politics or our ability to decide together. But that doesn't work in a politics or a political science department, because we know that the word I, which works in economics and neoclassical theory, doesn't work where you need the word we. I am a consumer, but we are citizens. And to be a citizen means I'm bound together, and I'm limited, and I'm obligated. There's a set of limits. So, the first slide here is just about, but you know all this. We have to think in systems and patterns. And if we don't think in systems and patterns, if we don't teach that, that becomes the reflexive way to teach. So rigor we typically think of as going deeper and deeper into subject matter until, some quip put it years ago, we know more and more about less and less until we know everything about nothing. That's rigor. And that kind of rigor, taken to its logical conclusion, is not distinguishable from rigor mortis. There's another kind of rigor. And we need both. We need specialization, yes. But we also need lateral rigor where people are taught, you are taught. And we are reflexively think in terms of how do I combine knowledge across disciplines and fields. So it's not a matter of either or. We have to walk into the future on two intellectual legs, one being specialization, the other being integration, analysis and synthesis. Now, the other point I'd like to make is this. Oh, thanks for getting it right side up. What I'm doing right now is up here at the top, and you're going to forget this because the retention rate for lecture method here is very low. And you're going to, unless I do something really outrageous, you're going to forget this. And so what I'm doing is pretty disposable. This is bad pedagogy. Now, as you go down the triangle, this is kind of generalized information, but come down the triangle here, what do you remember? You see the retention rate goes way up here. What happens? Well, when we engage you. So as we begin to rethink the university or reinvent the university, we have to begin to think through what it means to learn something and how that learning process occurs. Now, we know all this. This, again, is not something that's horribly novel. We know we learn best by doing things, or at the very bottom of the triangle, by helping others, by teaching others to do things. We know these things. But that's not how we organize the university. We still organize it as if the lecture method, we come back in, and the lecture method is still the predominant method of teaching across the United States and Europe. And you sit out there as passive students. The person comes in, you have bulletproof podium, blackboard, or whatever it is, students lined up in military formation. You can't move these chairs around. There's no flexibility here. The professor is down at the front. And that we take to be a learning situation. And you dutifully write down what I, the professor, say, or I think you do. You're rewarded on the basis of whether you can regurgitate it back. And I know this is not the way things happen in UVM, so this is completely novel to you. But you're rewarded on the calibration of how much you can regurgitate back that the professor said. What we think you're taking notes out there, you know, it's Dear Jack, he is at it again. You know, this is really boring, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, you know these things. So I want to propose two things. When we begin to rethink the university, how do ideas move here? We have to rethink what it is we do here and how we do it. We've got to think in terms of systems and patterns. And that's a whole different kind of pedagogy. And then we have to begin to engage people. Education doesn't just start here and go up and then dismiss half of that. Education has to engage the whole person. There is such learning as embodied learning, and we have to begin to face a different kind of curriculum. Now, the question there, and that is right side out, can institutions that purport to advance learning themselves learn? And so I want to begin to think through what Peter Senge from MIT in a wonderful book called The Fifth Discipline describes as learning organizations. What does it mean to be a learning organization? And a good bit of what's happened here at UVM, to your credit, is beginning to reflect the kind of things that need to change in higher education. Now, the oldest institutions on the earth, the oldest is the Catholic Church of continuous service. The next oldest are universities. And the format has not changed a great deal in what we do. If you take out computers in the past 50 years, the amount of actual innovation in university curriculum is very small. Now, learning here is not a matter, as I'm thinking about it, and I think as Peter Senge intends it, is not a matter of figuring out how to do better something that shouldn't be done. I really don't want Coca-Cola to learn how to become a learning organization so they can sell more Coca-Cola. The last thing the world needs is more Coca-Cola. I really don't want the Pentagon to become a learning organization. I don't want them in green buildings either, by the way. I want them to be miserable. The Pentagon ought to be a cold, dark, damp place. In some ways it is anyway. Yeah, I don't want Walmart to be green. Walmart ought to be, the act of consumption ought to be a miserable act. It's dark and dingy and dirty inside. Leave. I mean, there's an answer to consumption. But can we begin to learn as organizations relative to global change? What does that mean for us? Now, begin to think of what can happen in terms of a learning organization. I'm going to skip over this so we can get to questions in dialogue. But what happens if we become, in higher education, models of ecological design? And you know what design is. It's John Todd's work, the father of ecological design. It's Bob's work. It's a lot of people you've had here. But it's remaking the human presence in the world. It's a recalibration of what we intend to do with how the world works. And then a feedback loop that comes back and says, begins to inform our intentions. So that what we intend in the world, it actually begins to reflect what the world is and how the world works. So ecological design, how do we become models of that? And that's an abstraction. So we begin to see what that abstraction in fact means. We're visual creatures. We learn by seeing and doing. How do we begin to reflect that? Talk about redesigning the society, too big. Can't do that. Can't get, there's no handle on that pot. If you begin to see it in terms of UVM or Oberlin or wherever the institution is, grade schools and high schools, so that put a big dome down on the institution, everything that comes in, everything that leaves. And begin to see these input-output systems. So the universities become reflections of the very best kind of thinking about design and how we model these things. Leverage. How do we change the world? How do those ideas that I mentioned at the start, you can make a long list of ideas that are good ideas, we know they work, science is there, but they're very slow to move into society or they don't move at all. How do we begin to move those ideas into society? What if UVM or Oberlin or whatever, these 3,800 institutions of higher education begin to model the very best thinking? So we say that we're going to become zero discharge institutions, that there is no waste product that will leave UVM or an institution of higher education. We hire Michael Shaw and John Todd and others to come in and say, hey, what do we do here with our waste stream? How do we eliminate that waste stream? That's leverage. That is a lot of buying power. Our buying power, even in a bad market, is still about $200 billion per year. Our investing is probably down to about 120, but that's a lot of money. And most of that's Harvard. So, but that's not even a joke, is it? Harvard's endowment's, what, 20 billion or some such. But that's a lot of leverage. That's a lot of clout. We're a lot of people. Those ideas can move in society. We don't need to be stuck. This is very quickly some things that we're doing at Oberlin or have done. I'm going to show you a couple of slides on the Lewis Center, but that's only the start of it. How do we begin to move ideas on a campus? Well, one of the things we did was to begin to engage students in the process of designing and planning. 2 years ago, we initiated an effort to organize students around a climate-neutral plan for the campus. Could we become climate neutral by the year 2020? And if so, how would that work? And so we brought in the Rocky Mountain Institute. We had some students involved with, organized through our office or our department. We engaged students in private readings and research. We now have a committee focused on climate issues and other kinds of things. It's the Campus Environmental Policy Committee. So every place where the college touches the environment, at every interface point, whether it's air or water or investment or the town or whatever, how we build, how we landscape and so forth, all of those things we want to be covered by a policy. So it's not just the Talwa Declaration, which is a very good document, but it doesn't tell anybody what to do. What's the purchasing agent do based on Talwa? Well, there's a lot of complexity in what a college buys and so forth. So beginning to see change within the campus as we begin to move toward becoming a designed institution. Will it work? Don't know. Got a long way to go. But this is how ideas begin to happen. This is the Lewis Center. Several things make this building, I think, unique. One is that the original building program was done by about 250 students working variously through 13 design charrettes. Now, we're not used to being participants in the design of buildings around us. Those things happen to us. Shopping malls happen to us. Highways and developments happen to us. What we did in this was to say, look, we're going to make a building. What do you want to build? How do you want to build it? What do you want to have happen after the thing is done? What's the building say to us? So it's a recognition that architecture and design and the built environment is always going to be pedagogical. It's always going to teach us something. The question is, how does it teach us, and does it teach us the right things? Does it make us more mindful or less mindful? The goal here was to make a building that was mindful, that made us more competent and better stewards and better people and a nicer place and all that. That's one of the things that was unique about it. The second is the range of things that went into it. We brought a bunch of rowdy people together around the building. Michael and John were involved in the design process of the living machine, which is this area right here. So the building processes its own waste stream. We brought in Bill McDonough, Amory Lovins, John Lyle, people from NASA, NREL. We still have a team working on the evolution of the building that consists of about 15 or 20 people in various ways, and so forth. And then the building began to drive the curriculum in some very interesting ways. The building ecological engineering is now part of our curriculum. Systems ecology is part of it. Ecological landscaping is part of it. Ecological design of other buildings. There's another building that goes to the west of this site, which is to your left, which we'll break ground on. It's going to be an adaptive reuse. We'll do that building this next summer. But we began to see how you could weave together the built environment and curriculum. We're visual creatures. We're down at the bottom of that triangle, trying to engage people by doing things, engaging students in the act of designing and researching. The way the energy systems work. The building has a photovoltaic array. The monitoring of that array, the display of that information, that's now part of the curriculum at Oberlin. I'll skip over that. That's just some of the features in a standard green building. These are all part of the Lewis Center. But the interesting part to me was, as we got into the design process, much like what's happening here in places of the Intervale and so forth, people are engaged. We're a lot smarter than we think we are. And by engaging students in the process of change early on, what we did was to speed up the way we think about leadership and the evolution of leadership. We have a standard view of life. You know, it starts out, you get born. It's kind of George Carlin view. You get born, you go to grade school, you go to kindergarten, grade school, middle school, high school, you take the SATs, you come to UVM, you go through UVM. If you become a professor, you start up the ladder, assistant, associate. You're starting to get tired. You can't do anything yet. You got to stay in the box. You got to be decent. You can't be inappropriate. You have to be a conformist primarily. You get to be a full professor. You're tenured. By the time you're ready to do something, you're roughly 50 years of age. You have a heart attack or stroke. So you go on kind of, and then you retire at 65. They have a party for you. You retire in Florida. That's where everybody seems to retire. Or Phoenix. Everybody else is down there. And then you die. And in the whole course of things, you're always deferring doing things. Now, I want to come back to this point. I want to end on this point in just a second. But think about rearranging a life where you begin to do significant things early on. And we educate you to move ideas and move society. But go from, hey, wow, that's a good idea, to that's a great thing. Something happened out of it. Something's happening right there. Now, very quickly, Bob, I need to wrap up here in 5 minutes. What we did then was to, what we are doing now is to figure out what ideas can we move from Oberlin, making to the green building and so forth. What can we do there to move it down into the Rust Belt? What other trouble can we cause in the world? So several things happen here. Let me describe a couple. One is we opened 5 years ago. We opened an office in Cleveland. A graduate class of 1998 came in, did not have a job and so forth, and asked if I had any prospects for him. And about the same time, the George Gunn Foundation had wanted to start a speaker series in Cleveland, and I didn't have the time to do it, so Saudi Johnson, a graduate class of 1998, started the speaker series. And that has grown now into the Cleveland Green Building Coalition, which is a major force now in Cleveland in several ways. And I'll show you another slide in just a minute. It's a project like that. 2 years ago, 3 students came into my office, and they wanted to do something about resuscitating the downtown. We're in the crosshairs of development, like everyone is, and Walmarts and so forth. And so they wanted to do something, and 22 years of age. And I thought, you can't do anything at 22. But I kept saying, yeah, well, what can you do? We talked for about 2 hours. Finally, in frustration, I said, oh, go buy the old Buick dealership that had gone belly up. And I went off to London last year. I came back. They bought the Buick dealership. And then they bought Jack's dry cleaning store beside the Buick dealership. And then they bought the, the Rack's fast food place beside Jack's. They bought a whole city block. They've launched a $15 to $20 million project, and they don't have a lot of money having to raise this money or borrow it or whatever. $15 to $20 million project to put an anchor building at that end of the town that will be 3 floors of mixed housing with a wine bar on top, the John Todd wine bar, and John Todd David Orr wine bar. And then 6 stores down, 23 years of age now, beginning to change the world. 5 years ago, we started a CSA in town, a community-supported farm. Got 70 acres from the college for $0 or $1 a year lease, whatever it is. That's formed into the Ecological Design Innovation Center. Now, the point is, could we in higher education become, as you are doing here through the Intervale and John's work and lots of other things, could we generally throughout higher education begin to open the door so ideas go out on the main street? Can we start to move ideas? We're visual creatures. People need to see, touch, and feel things. And so the ideas about how we remake the human presence in the world need to be manifest in the world in very visible form. This is Sadhu Johnson. This is a local builder. This is the bank building that the Cleveland Green Building Coalition bought last year or a year and a half ago. The bottom floor will house a bank starting, I believe it's next week, but it's imminent. The whole building has been made over, redesigned with LEED building standards as the criteria. There are 6 floors here. The top 5 floors will house various nonprofit organizations around the Cleveland area. This building had been abandoned since the late 1960s, built in 1918, a great old building, by the way. Down the street that way is the Great Lakes Brewing Company. We have a project, class of mine went into the brewery 2 years ago. They'd asked us to help them become a zero-discharge brewery. And so I called John and Eric, and we began to work on what would happen out of the liquid waste stream, what happens out of their spent grains and so forth. That's now grown into a larger development idea in that whole area. So there's a cluster of development here, driven largely by a variety of people coming in, including Oberlin students and graduates coming in to remake this part of Cleveland. But imagine how exciting this is. We're not fated to live in ugly, decaying cities falling apart. We can do better than that. A lot of the ideas about how to rebuild the urban fabric of life are right here. They're in the higher education now. How do we get them out the door and begin to change things? That's the top of that particular bank building. Great view of the downtown of Cleveland, by the way. And now I'm going to end on this. How do we change the world? Well, I don't know. And to even pose the question is the risk sounding kind of pompous. But what I do know is this. If it's going to be changed, the change isn't right now going to come from the U.S. federal government. Probably isn't going to come from many states, although there are a few doing some really interesting things on climate issues and agriculture and so forth. It's not going to come from corporate America, not now, not at this point, not by and large. In some cases, maybe yes, there's Ray Anderson Interface Corporation and a few other really good examples, but not many. That's not the mainstream of the business world. Where will the change come from? How do we begin to develop ideas that move across that chasm from being great ideas, great research, great science, to being reality? Who's going to do it? You and I are going to have to do it. And it's going to take this kind of dedicated minority of people who are competent, who care, who can think at right angles and also can become specialists, who know how to move ideas, not just have ideas, but to move ideas out into the world. So it's going to take all of you and all the students I have becoming that kind of creative, maladjusted minority. This sounds kind of like an Al-Qaeda cell, doesn't it? But in a good sense. People who are equipped to do positive kinds of things and begin to change the valence of our time from being negative, headed off one cliff or another, toward a future that is sustainable and just and fair and a very different kind of world. Thank you.
There's some cards that have been passed around to write down questions. We have a panel of students that will coordinate the question and answer period. And there's a group of students in the classes that are attached to this seminar that have also done some reading and posted questions online. So we'll now get a suite of questions for David. You can pass your cards down.
That's really appreciated. We have divided the questions up into about a half dozen areas: education, corporations as learning organizations, pessimism related to the environmental movement, practical application of sustainability principles, the political realm, and media and spirituality.
So the first question will be the education section. In your paper, Walking North on the Southbound Train, one of your major concerns was the ignorance or lack of involvement of the public and government in other important world issues. Let's say you were allowed to design a curriculum or just one lesson dealing with these issues that you mentioned in your paper for a group of first graders. If you could make just one rule for these children to walk away with, what would it be?
For first graders?
First graders, yes.
First graders. Next question. Oh man, first grade. Well, the process of empowerment, and I don't much like the word, it's become a trite word, but the process of empowerment begins early on, the habits of engagement around us. And in terms of curriculum, wouldn't it be great if from the very beginning, students, young people were taught that they were active agents in shaping the place around them and where their food came from and growing their food, processing wastewater. So they don't wait until they're 19 to learn about, say, living machines. They begin to learn that. That becomes the default setting early on. And you begin to teach connectedness early on and the competence necessary to make good connections. So is that a good enough answer for short? I don't know what to do with first graders. But I think something ought to be done with them.
This is a question from the audience. How would you define the goal of education? Define the goal of education.
Well, let me make a distinction. Education and schooling and learning are all different kinds of things. The goal of education ought to be, in a formal sense, beginning, K through PhD, ought to be to equip people to learn and love learning. I know too many people who graduate from college and don't want to read another book, and that their education has failed them at that point. What education has to do is, Alfred North Whitehead described this as a romance with learning and with ideas. And so the goal of education ought to be to liberate the mind. But we assume education stops with the baccalaureate degree or what PhD or whatever it is. It doesn't. It just starts there. All you can do is to open the doors and equip somebody for launch. And you hope that they do launch. Not I mean in the job sense, I mean in intellectual sense. But learning is a lifelong thing. You can't stop, and especially not now when knowledge is so forming so rapidly and changing so rapidly. So is that enough on that? Goal of education, test scores.
A number of the questions in the readings, from the readings, dealt with practical application of some of these ideas. And this question, so if you could more specifically talk on the means by which conventional design will be overcome by ecological design, how will it be actualized, and how can it be moved from the minority to the mainstream?
These are good questions. And the class goes till 5 o'clock tonight. We're visual creatures again. And we believe what we see. And what the goal of design ought to be, I think, is, as somebody once put it, we've got to have a party everybody wants to come to. And so design can't be law, no matter how bad things get. I don't know that fear motivates us very much. Design can't come out of fear. Oh my God, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. It may be, but that's not going to motivate us. And I need a caveat here. My dad was a Presbyterian preacher. And so I grew up Presbyterian. Presbyterians are the kind of people, somebody once said, who lie awake at night worrying about whether somebody somewhere is having fun. And so, a good bit of what happens in higher education is Presbyterian. We think it really ought to be painful and miserable and tests. It ought to hurt. I don't think that works very well. If we're going to have a party that everybody wants to come to, then we need to design great buildings. One of the great things about Michael's work and John's work is you walk into a living machine, it looks fantastic. It looks good. There are flowers, and there's color, and there are banners and flags and light. It smells good. I mean, we've got to begin to change people's sense of what's exciting. And design has to look good. It has to feel good. And at all extremes, design isn't just about high-techy buildings. It's an Amish barn raising. It's a straw bale building. It's vernacular architecture. It's all just ranges of different kinds of ecological design. But how do you move anything into the mainstream? It's a great question. Imagine an effort with all colleges and universities to become ecologically designed, models of design, the one slide I showed. Become models of design, and the default setting is we power everything by sunlight or by renewable power in this place. And there are zones of wildness, and it's a zero discharge place. People begin to see these things. And it's not just an idea, well, that's a good idea, and that book goes on the shelf. No, no. It's the reality. It's how we build colleges and universities. It's what people see. And I think this seeing it and experiencing it is the way that these ideas will move in the world. Good question.
This is a question from the audience. It says, it's a little press, the media is so powerful. We could say it bears a large responsibility for conspicuous consumerism. How can we use it to initiate and encourage the sustainability movement? Use media to educate the university and our unwilling masses.
Oh, well, whoever gave that question, that's a good one. I don't have an answer for it. I'm going to stumble around for a minute until I can think of something smart to say here. One response to the media is, stand in your living room or your den, pick up a large, heavy object, and hurl at high speed through the screen. And the media now, as all of you know, has been more and more centralized and co-opted. And so if you turn to Republican channel, the Fox channel, you're just beamed directly from the White House without filter. I'm not sure what we do with the media. One answer is to ignore it or just develop our own. But if you want to find out what's going on in the war in the United States right now, you don't go to Tom Brokaw. If you want to find out about the Iraqi war, watching over the weekend a couple times, Operation Iraqi Freedom in gold letters. And Tom's up there reading the news. And ta-da, it comes to us as entertainment. I've got the sneaking suspicion if the end of the world comes next week, NBC News will bring the end of the world, ta-da, big gold letters, brought to you by Nike, Mobil, It'll come to us as entertainment. We can't be entertained. We have to be reflective and thoughtful. Wholly different thing. And I don't know how we use the media because I don't know that we want to try to entertain people into sustainability. I'm not sure that that's the right way to do it. And also, it's really kind of hard. This is one of the problems in making movies out of, say, Wendell Berry's books. It's hard to get decent people doing decent things to each other, sharing and loving each other and weeding their garden and, baling hay, and being nice and being pleasantly tired at night and eating healthy food. Hardly the stuff in movies. Sustainability, I don't know what we do about this. I'm just wandering around. I'm not sure how you use the media or whether, in fact, we boycott the media or develop our own. But the media, as it is presently constituted, is more and more concentrated, more and more aimed to entertain us and not to educate or to... Let me give one if I can go on for one more minute on that. Think back in American history to the Lincoln-Douglas debates, my favorite kind of political example. Lincoln and Douglas hammered out at these 8 debates in Illinois, 1858, and the issue on the agenda, of course, is slavery. They didn't get it right necessarily, but they took it seriously. And the debates are long, and they hammered each other, and debates are actually structured, and there are allusions to the classical tradition, and you can tell the audience is following the debates because there'll be in the full transcript, there's laughter, there's booing, there's jeering. They're following the arguments. They took those arguments seriously. pro, con, whatever. Some took it so seriously that they fought for those ideas, and some died for those ideas. They were citizens. We tend to have been defined or have defined ourselves as consumers, and consumers need to be entertained. That's what the media is very good at. And then while they're entertaining us, they're helping to foster or encourage the great American motion sickness, cars, and the great American eating disorder. We are the most obese, fattest people on the earth. We're fat enough now to change the spin of the earth, just so slight. I'm not sure, but I think there have to be different venues and different formats where we come together as citizens and we talk to each other, not be talked at by media. So I'm not sure what we do with that, and I'll quit.
How do you feel about Howard Dean as a presidential candidate?
How do I feel or how do I think about Howard Dean? Well, let me only say this. I don't know much about Howard Dean. What I've heard is fine. I'm a George Bush voter myself. In other short stories. I think, let me just say, I don't know Howard Dean well to respond to the question, but I'll tell you what I think needs to happen. We need to get first a president. Right now we have a resident, not elected. And there's something like a coup d'etat that happened in 2000. We're seeing this play itself out. And I don't use the word coup d'etat casually. Where the Supreme Court, 5-4 decision, they were going to take power, hell or high water. They were taking power. They knew what they wanted. And they simply elbowed everybody else out of the way. This was political thuggery on a high scale. And what we've seen, the evolution since, to take over the Project for New American Century crowd, Libby and Pearl and Cheney, whatever your politics are, if you're a good Republican, you have to be disturbed by this, I think, also. But how did they hijack our language? How did the word conservative come to apply to somebody in their Humvee with an American flag and a God Bless America bumper sticker on their way to the mall? That doesn't define anything that's conservative or even patriotic. We need to take our language back. Words need to be calibrated with reality and with our best ideals. So what I would like to see happen is somebody start to push the debate back. Our politics we used to have something of a left, never a real left in the European sense. But then it got pulled into what you're thinking about. So it got pulled into the center. And the range of our politics began to reflect the skewed income in the country. As we began to develop, was it 400 billionaires in the United States, whatever the number is, but wealth got more and more skewed, our politics got more and more skewed to the right. We don't have liberals in this country anymore. You remember that, well, you're somebody too young to remember this, but in the Dukakis George Bush #1 debate back in 1988, when George Bush accused Dukakis of being a liberal. Now things will sometimes just sort of freeze, and you want to speed up, and you want to, Mike, say you're proud to be a liberal. And just tell them, yeah, I'm a liberal, and I'm proud of it, and here's what that word means. And here's why you're a liberal too. And here's why we all ought to be liberals. But be proud of it. But instead you begin back, well, I'm not really liberal, I don't really believe these things, I'm mealy-mouthed. And what needs to happen is American politics need to begin to reflect a balance again. There needs to be a progressive part of American politics. There needs to be a legitimate conservative wing. George Bush isn't conservative. He's merely reckless. And there's a big difference, And until we can say that, and I don't care whether your politics or Republican, it doesn't make a bit of difference to me. Because if you're a good Republican, you've got to be disturbed by what you see happening around you. So Howard Dean, I don't know. But I think I'd like to see somebody pull our politics back into some kind of semblance of balance. And I don't think, from my reading of American politics, I don't think we have much time to do it. I think if we don't counter this crowd in 2004, and they've got our troops strung out over there being shot at in places where I don't think they ought to be shot at, so this is, we need to support the troops, but I'd rather support them by not putting them where they don't belong. And then if we think that, well, shoot, I'll run for president. The slightest encouragement. Enough said. Yes.
Many of the questions from the reading focused on spirituality. if spirituality and openness of mind and heart truly do play a role in accelerating the environmental movement, then the strength of the movement itself depends on the degree to which its leaders actively acknowledge this mindset. The discussion of any sort of spirituality or collective driving force promoting the greater good is largely left out of academic and political conversations. How do you, or do you have any suggestions for integrating these concepts into the communal agenda so that their potential can be realized?
Yeah, what's the next question after that? Oh man, I mean, where do I start? Last week I was out at Brigham Young University, which is a Mormon university, and before my talk there was prayer. And became clear that part of the prayer was for the audience, which probably needed prayer since I was a speaker. And that would be probably offensive to lots of people because it's denominational and it's the Mormon view, whatever you think of that. Two comments. One is, we are inevitably religious or spiritual critters. We can't help it be. We can stand all kinds of hardship and deprivation. We cannot stand meaninglessness. We can't tolerate it. You can work hard, you can sacrifice as long as you know what it's for and there's a goal out there, it feels good. And you'll do it. But once it's kind of, after you've gotten what you were after, there's a kind of an ennui or malaise that sets in. You've done it, it's over. And we cannot stand meaninglessness. We are meaning-seeking creatures. It's kind of like an artesian well. It's going to bubble out of us one way or another. And we'll make something or other in a religion. You know, it'll be baseball, nationalism, it can be environmentalism, it can be Methodism, it can be whatever it is. And our choice is not whether we're religious or not, but whether we're authentically religious. That's the only choice we have. And then the question is, how do we mix values in what we learn? I grew up at a time when value-free social science, I grew up intellectually at a time when value-free social science was a big deal. But value-free social science is also a value. We're locked in a conundrum. We can't escape it. To be a professor is to profess something. But it's a matter of laying what you profess on the table where it can be analyzed and studied. And so it's an open process. To be a good author or scholar or researcher is to lay out, here is what I've assumed. Here is how I did my work. Here's what I did. And then the reader can take it or leave it. But the idea that somehow we can eliminate values from learning is an absurdity. We couldn't do it if we tried. It cannot be done. The question is, what values are built into it? Now, takes me to the last point is this. The writer of Deuteronomy has us, enjoins us to facing life and death to choose life. And I think that's what our times have done for us. I think we've come to a point where we can eliminate or radically alter life on this planet. If we were sitting here 120 years ago, you and I, at that time, couldn't make a list of anything very bad that would happen to the whole planet, except for collision with a meteor. That's about it. There was no way we could terminate life everywhere 100, 200 years ago. Now, all of us, or any well-informed high school kid, can make a long list of all the things that could end life or radically alter life for the worse on the planet. There's a little bit of imagination. Cyber terrorism, you just get down the list. Nuclear meltdown, all those things that could happen. I think what we have to do is to choose life in this case. And what does that mean? A life-centered curriculum. Reattaching the idea of the life of the mind, how we think to how we live. And I can't tell you how that, what that means exactly, except that's a high calling. And I think that's the yardstick against how we measure the academy. And it doesn't mean one final note here. Science can't tell us whether we ought to survive. It might tell us if we chose to direct it in this way, how we could survive. But it can't tell us whether to survive. That's something totally different. Science can direct us toward death or toward life. It doesn't make a bit of difference. It could be, either one can be done rigorously and scientifically. It doesn't make a bit of difference. And the issue now is how do we begin to orient science and the learning enterprise away from the powers of, let's say, speed, accumulation, and death. We know a lot about how to kill each other and very little about how to love each other and care for each other. We know a lot about how to build suburbs, not very much yet about how we make really great cities. We know a lot about fossil fuel civilization and not nearly enough yet about how we make a solar-powered society. And all those are matters of simply choosing life.
In traveling north on a southbound train, you talk about our environmental situation as a political crisis. Our crisis demands immediate action. Writing papers and preaching to the proverbial choir does not convey the sense of urgency needed. How can we be immediate friction to the southbound train?
How was the last one?
Be immediate friction to the southbound train.
What was the last word? How do we?
Be immediate friction to the southbound train.
Immediate friction. Well, that just slows it down. How do we turn it around? Man, I don't know. Bob, you told me the questions would be easier than this. You know the red-blue map from election 2000? The red zone is a lot of real estate. Blue zone is cities and scattered places where Democrats historically have done pretty well. But the red zone, how do we begin to get out in the red zone? And I think, again, I don't know. One idea that has come up in the last 4 or 5 months is something like this. Could you put really good science and good information together with really good media presentations? Say somebody like Michael Moore, except with a little more tact than the Academy Award. Could you put money, good ideas, good delivery out there so that you hit media markets in the red zone and target some of the cities in the red zone? Because what people are listening to, when I go out to see my friend Wes Jackson, I get a rental car in Kansas City, and I drive across Kansas, and I get Paul Harvey, Rush Limbaugh, Gordon Liddy on talk radio, and I get them on any one of 5 channels typically. I mean, it's saturated with hate and fear and misinformation. How do we counter them? And one of the, this again, it goes back, and I'm talking on the other side of an answer I gave before, but here I think media may be useful. Imagine, for example, a 30-second slot that hits 3 times a night in prime time coverage across the range of channels. Fox wouldn't run it, but others would. 30 seconds on, say, climate change, or soil loss, or income distribution, or health care. Not partisan, not Democrat, Republican, just information. So if you've got 30 seconds and you're talking to people in the red zone, say the center of the country or north central Florida or wherever it is, but people who are typically right-wing voters or don't vote at all, what would you want to say to them? You've got 30 seconds. And you have somebody like Susan Sarandon or James Earl Jones do the voiceover on it, so you've got a voice people know. You got the Keeling curve starting up, and you got your background fades into storms and blowing winds and so forth. But how could we begin to up the ecological IQ out there in the public? And this is a public that is, I think, with us, but doesn't know very much. New York Times 2 weeks ago reported that 40% of the public thinks that Saddam Hussein organized and planned and executed 9/11. We went, as a public, we went across this chasm from Osama bin Laden, remember him, to Saddam Hussein without an evidentiary bridge. We levitated across on hot air from the White House. No evidence. And the CIA, George Bush's own CIA, said, we can't find any evidence. I remember Colin Powell at the UN come running in saying, aha, we got an Osama bin Laden tape, and this shows, since he's wishing Iraqis well, it shows an Iraqi al-Qaeda connection. There may be, but at this point we don't know that there is, but 40% of the public think there is. And most of the public, a majority, I'm told, believe that global warming is a matter of pollution. Carbon dioxide is not a typical pollutant. It's another kind of issue. So the question is, how do we raise the IQ level out in the red zone? And since we can get people hooked on Big Macs and Coca-Cola and French fries and fast cars and pickup trucks and SUVs, might we use some of the same skills adroitly exercised with pristine, good, clear information, and then pick 200 themes, healthcare, climate change, whatever it might be, and air those. And the effect you want is down at the truck stop the next morning, 2 people saying, hey, did you hear that? I didn't know that. But I think the public is with us if they knew enough. But the right wing in the country, and I mean extreme right wing, has muddied the water a good bit. And 20 million Americans listen to Rush Limbaugh every day, 30 million to right-wing radio. And the rest is kind of history. I don't remember what the question was, but that's my answer, and I'm sticking to it.
Can you suggest some specific careers or activist techniques that you believe would have the most potential to affect change?
Oh, yeah. Good question. And maybe is that where we need to end up? The Chinese symbol for crisis mixes opportunity and danger together. And we know the danger part. All of us know that. That's front page of paper. That's World Watch reports. That's all kinds of stuff. The opportunity side is incredible. This is a great time to be alive. You can take the word environment, or ecological, attach it to any other career line. Environmental health, environmental medicine, environmental law, environmental planning, sustainability, sustainable agriculture, forestry, ecological engineering. I mean, think of the career lines. Ecological design, the career lines now are incredible. Now, what has to happen here is if you're most of your students, don't think in the box. Get your calling first. You have a good Presbyterian preacher's kid. Get your calling first. Find out why you're here, and then get your career. Don't look for a career first. You know what I'm saying? You can always find a career in a calling, but you can't find it the other way around. Get the cart and horse in the right relationship. Find something that you really get excited about. Find something that, don't ask your guidance counselor or the career officer here at the university for advice. They don't have a clue. First of all, I mean, they're good people, but they don't know you. They don't know what you dream about, what you think about. Let me tell you one story. I had a student advisee way back, years back, and he was a pretty mediocre student, smart kid, but mediocre student. He just wasn't turned on, and he would say, said, what do you want to be? Well, I want to be a doctor. Why do you want to be a doctor? Well, I just want to be a doctor. And one day it became very apparent. His parents were there. Both parents were doctors. They came in driving a Mercedes. They got out. They wanted to talk to me. Vinny was a senior, and the grades weren't particularly good. They wanted to get him to Harvard Medical School or something. It was going to be tough. We're going to have to give a lot of money to get him in. And we sat there in my office, and Vinny, what do you want to be? Well, I want to be a doctor. And so we agonized through this for a while. Parents left. Said, Vinny, come on, let's go get a cup of coffee. Walked uptown, got a cup of coffee, and said, Vinny, what do you want to be? I want to be a doctor. I said, bullshit. You don't want to be a doctor. You're bored. Grades are bad. Your organic chemistry was a disaster for you. So what do you really care about? I said, you really want to know? I said, yeah. Wolves. He was a wolf guy. Ever since Little Red Riding Hood, he's had a fascination with wolves. He said his room at home, pictures of wolves, stuffed wolves, books about wolves, Barry Lopez book about wolves, he's a wolf guy. He's now doing his PhD work in wildlife management. He's tagging and collaring wolves, tracking wolves around. He started out with doing wolf education. I'm not sure he was educating wolves about ranchers or ranchers about wolves, but he was wolf education. But find something that you are really excited. I mean, imagine, I take my dear friend John Todd, who's taught me more. I mean, imagine John Todd's career. John goes into the guidance counselor and got this interest in, we'll have these sort of tanks. Plants on top, roots going down, water column. Crap comes in, clean water comes out. Can I call you John? I admire your idealism. Cleaning the world's water is a wonderful thing. We have sewage treatment plants. We do this otherwise. And John, you really have an aptitude for economics. I mean, and the market, we need more economists. The world's growing. I mean, I'm being ridiculous here. But what John didn't get that career, or Bob, or Michael, or lots of wonderful people didn't get the careers because they stayed in the box. They had a passion, and they followed the passion. And the passion is going to take you off in all kinds. It's going to be a ride. But what was the original question?
You're on the right track.
I'm on the right track. But what's the track I'm on? I need a calling here. Find something you really want. Find the work in the world that needs to be done. Find the part of it that you are gifted to do, and do it. And you'll find it. You know what that is. It may take a while to discover it, and you can't see the end of it. If you follow it, if you start looking for a career, you know right where you start, right where you finish. They'll retire you out here. You work the way up the ladder, and that's easy and that's straightforward. If you have a low tolerance for ambiguity, you probably need to do that. But if you're willing to tolerate some ambiguity and some uncertainty, and you want a heck of a story to tell at the end, get a calling. It's a whole lot more fun anyway. So, thank you.